co-creators of The Friend, Scott, McGehee, and Dane Siegel. Thank you. Scott and David, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations. You're just so lovely film.
A beautiful screen.
It's great theater to be shot on the screen.
Yeah, it's just rewatched it for the last 10 minutes from the back, and it's just such a beautiful theater.
The two of you have been making movies together for more than 25 years now. And I was so curious about, and let's start by talking about The Friend. Does one of you read the book first and then settle the other one on it? How does that actually work when you're in collaboration with another filmmaker?
In this case, that's exactly what happened. David actually read a review of the book that excited him enough that we worked with a third party, Mike Streeters, a producing partner of ours. So the three of us all read the book together, but based on David's enthusiasm for what he thought was a good,
Well, I read the very first review of the book, Primer's review in the New York Times, and I was immediately struck by what seemed like a story, a very intimate story set in New York that was kind of a big story simultaneously that, and hadn't read the book yet, but we immediately all read the book and got pretty excited.
the dog part of it was super intriguing to us. And in a way, we've talked about it since the review kind of encapsulated the plot in a way that the book is quite different from the movie. It's very interior. It's got a lot of it's a beautiful, lovely book. And Sigurd's writing voice is so kind of generous and warm and lovely to read, but it's a much more complicated kind of like interior space.
But many digressions about the literary world and other things that couldn't really be brought into the movie story, but it's a beautiful book, and it went on to win a National Book Award, and it's now a very notable book, but we were really struck by it.
Because I'm very interested in, because when I think about the films you two have made, I could never predict from the movie that you've made last, the movie that you would make next. I think about Suture and the Teeth End we're going to show after this, and Montana Story, What Makes It New. When you said, David, that you read the review, and it sparked something in you, do the two of you think in terms of what a David and Scott movie is, or is it just something that is an idea or a theme that just hits you in that moment, or more importantly, I guess, it's both of you at the same time that you want to pursue?
I mean, I try and think about what a Scott story would be, and I know Scott tries to think about what David's story would be. No, we have been attracted. We are attracted to emotional stories about, held feelings that either are held in or withheld, and then the final bursting of those feelings, like wind up having consequences that maybe are unexpected. But I think the variety of things that we've been drawn to. Maybe the unifying aspect of them is a sort of emotional feeling.
Because I went back and read reviews of the book in preparation for us talking today. One of the things I was very struck by in a lot of the reviews, obviously the reviews were glowing, is over and over again, the review said this book is so great because it tackles two things that usually end up being sort of mawkish. A story about grief and a story about someone bonding with an animal. And the reviews all said that this book sidesteps that. Because, as you said, David, the two of you are kind of almost emotion first when you're thinking about telling a story. When you're tackling something like The Friend, are there sort of pitfalls you want to avoid? Like, we know this is a story about a person and a dog don't get along initially, but then come and form this bond. It's also a story about grief. But can you talk about, we don't want it to fall into this trope. We don't want it to have this cliche. Obviously, you have the book as a guide, but I'm curious about walking that fine line between something that's really emotional and really moving, and we don't want it to be too saccharine. We don't want it to be too sentimental.
Yeah, you sort of summed it up. I mean, those are all the things that we did talk about, and we didn't want it to be maudlin, we didn't want it to be truthfully in any kind of way. And I think our guiding light was Sigrid's voice. Sigrid's the voice of the narrator in the book. And that's where the idea came from for the voiceover in the movie. Because we had never had a voiceover like that in the movie. And it's an unusual voiceover because it's not expositional. It's, she's talking to Walter, Iris is talking to Walter, and then slowly over the course of the story, she begins to talk to the dog. And that was something that really was directly inspired by Sigrid's, the voice of the narrator in the book. Because, if you read other of Sigrid's books, there is a kind of unifying aspect to them in that you kind of hear Sigrid's voice, and it's a unique voice, and it's funny, and it's sharp, and it is kind of it's observational in a really interesting way, and we really wanted to try and capture that. So the voiceover in the movie is almost entirely lifted directly from the book.
I think in casting also, like casting Naomi and casting Bill, we were looking for actors who could give us some interiority, give us a kind of sense of who they are just by kind of looking at their faces, but also they're both gifted with having a kind of lightness, that kind of levity. They like tackle serious things, but still kind of give you a feeling of a warmer, lighter life that they both are taking part in. So that was awesome.
You had joked before that, in terms of the two sort of central characters, Apollo and Iris, you found your Apollo first. Was that always, I know that there were strikes and the pandemic and all these sort of things that slowed the process of this movie happening, but was it important for you to find the right Great Dane first and then find an actress who could then work with that dog?
And there was some degree of simultaneity into those searches, but the dog was, you can imagine it was, Dane was the last Dane that we saw. We traveled around the country with our trainer, Bill Berloni, and saw probably 30, something like 30 dogs, hundreds of submissions to play Apollo. And Dane was the last dog we saw, and we stopped searching at that point because we hadn't actually found a dog. Like all those dogs that we had seen, we didn't really think that we had found a dog that really could convey that kind of interior life that Scott was talking about.
Because Naomi Watts obviously has the famous story of sort of being discovered here in America by this sort of random headshot that David Lynch sees and says, I think she's the one, and then they meet. I'm just so curious in terms of dog casting. I don't mean this how does that process work? Are there actually headshots? How do they send people? How does that process actually work before you travel across the country, travel to Iowa to meet Vivian?
We got a lot of photographs and a lot of videos of different dogs, and like David said, we went out and met 30 or 40 of them, but it's not, I think we did meet a lot of show dogs, and we met not a lot, but we saw some dogs that, that had some, modeling experience. But the dog we ended up with is a family dog. Bev Klingesmith is the dog's owner, and she raised the dog with her family. It's a loved dog who kind of lived with them. And it's a really different feeling with a dog that was raised well and grew up in a loving environment. Like there's a kind of connection that you feel. And they make yourself very special.
Family pet, someone like part of your family, and Great Danes are very, they call them giant. It's one of the giant breeds, and so a lot of Danes they're very, very big, and they have very, very big heads, or they're extremely jowly, or so like, just like with actors, you're looking for a face that you want to be looking at over the course of a 2-hour movie, right? And you want to believe that you're going into the interior life of that actor, whether it be a dog or a person. So, Bing was, when we met Bing, we immediately were like, oh, this is the face that
when Naomi Watts comes to mind, I think about, maybe I said, a romantic comedy where you have chemistry, where you just see the two lead actors. How does that work then? Obviously, Naomi Watts, big animal lover, big dog lover. But was it one of those things, well, we need to put them in a room together just to see if, you know, being
that would have been good.
We didn't have that luxury.
Chemistry.
Between
Naomi and Dane.
Sorry, Naomi.
They said no, yeah. But I do wonder, in terms of, obviously you have Bev, and you have, the trainer build that you had. But at the same time, like, that is the central relationship in your movie, so I don't mean to remotely neglect it, that you do have to make sure that there is a rapport between her and Dane, and I'm curious how that takes time to develop.
I mean, honestly, we had this experience with another film, made a film called What Maisie Knew with a 6-year-old girl. And you just, it's a kind of leap of faith, really. You just don't know, like, what's it gonna be for this 6-year-old girl or this Great Dane to, like, work for, 6-7 weeks on a film project. Like, they don't know.
It's a leap of faith off a cliff.
Yeah. So you kind of like hope it's gonna go well. You hope that the first day goes well, and you hope there will be a second day and a third day that continues to go well, and you keep just crossing your fingers to the end. But
On like the fourth day of What Maisie Knew, this 6-year-old girl, Anata April, who we just love so much and was really, we think was really fabulous in the movie. Scott turned to me on, I think, day 4, day 5, and he said, what if she just turns to her mother tomorrow and says, Mommy, I don't want to do this anymore, right? Like, you don't say, well, you have to do it. Like, she's a 6-year-old girl, so it's kind of a, as Scott said, it's a real leap of faith that that's just going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, that performance in it's one of my favorite movies, but that performance is really remarkable. And I was driving over here tonight, I was thinking, so they've worked with kids as main characters and dogs as main characters. Like, they're violating all of the rules, supposedly. Like, don't work with kids, don't work with pets. You had said, Scott, that working with a dog, at the beginning of the conversation tonight, that interested you. Was the challenge of that? I know you guys are both dog people yourself, but was the challenge of, can we actually get this to work?
I don't think, I think we love the idea of the finished film. Like, we could imagine this giant beast walking around the streets of New York. It just seems so cinematic. Like, we just leaned into the idea of what that would be if we could accomplish it. And I don't think we thought that conscientiously about the pitfalls that David had a wonderful dog called Tiger, and Tiger had been in 2 other films of ours. Tiger was one of the stars of a film we made called Uncertainty with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Lynn Collins and Tiger. And that was a really good experience because we understood Tiger very well. We knew just what Tiger could do and what we shouldn't be asking Tiger to do. And because we proceeded with kind of knowing Tiger and building the project around her, that we kind of had some confidence, I think, that if we approached the dog performance correctly, we could do it. And we lucked out, I guess.
In terms of, well, actually, obviously there's one more chair up here. And so we talked about being a little bit who plays Holly, since it was announced that he was going to be here tonight. Let's bring out the final member of our panel. Carolyn, please join me.
This is Dane and Ben Clemens there.
Is extremely important part of why that happened, because being one was, that's where Dane would be looking. So if we needed to adjust Dane's eye line or get him to move, we just needed to move that. And that's where Dane would go.
Actually, it's okay, Bev. I'd love to ask you a question. Beforehand, Scott and David were talking about the kind of tour of the country, looking at different dogs. They find Dane. What did they tell you about the project? Like, had you read this book? Did you know anything about who Apollo is going to be in this story?
I had not read the book initially, but I did shortly after I heard about everything. They sent me an initial email, and I actually deleted it. It just sounded far-fetched for me. I'm in Iowa, and they're talking and filming in New York, and it didn't sound very realistic. But then I thought I would reach back out and help them find the right dog, with no intention of it being my dog. But then after talking to them, I realized that it was a cool sounding project, and it was, I thought, well, what the heck, I'll go ahead and submit Dane's photos. And then they ended up flying out to Iowa to meet us, and that was 5 years ago, so kind of hard to believe now.
The one problem with, or not problem, but the one hitch with Dane when we met him was that he was a little bit too young for the role. And the pandemic and then the other delays that happened, he aged just perfectly.
I want to talk a little bit about casting Naomi Watts, because she's terrific in the movie. But my understanding is that because she is an animal lover and dog lover, she had a family dog that had passed, or was it around the time that you were reaching out to her or thinking about?
Yeah, but shortly before we reached out to her, we learned that Naomi had had a very long-lived dog that she really loved that had died, so we knew how, and she'd been posting about it, and we knew how much she really loved animals and dogs in particular. So we thought that the project might appeal to her that way, but we also worried that maybe it couldn't be a little bit too raw. But she was, our producing partner, Liza Jason, is pals with Naomi, and so she was an easy broker to begin to talk to Naomi about the project. So that went well, and Naomi did respond to it. So Naomi's current dog is a rescue dog, a tiny little dog, like a teacup of a dog, but not even as big as Dane's head. And his name is Izzy, and Bing became good pals in the first session.
I want to ask both of you, but also that as well. It was like, what, 6 weeks in terms of before shooting that Naomi and Bing was just sort of like a getting to know each other process, or how does that actually work before you're actually shooting that the two of them are kind of bonding?
Yeah, we came to New York several weeks before filming, and Naomi was incredibly gracious and welcomed us into her home to do training, which was, I think, very helpful, and I think it shows. We spent a lot of time working with Phil Berloni and Naomi, and we were able to really get being comfortable with Naomi and Naomi comfortable with him. He's larger than she is, so she had to be able to walk him around in all these places, and quite often she was the only one holding his lead when we were at various spots filming, and so it was very important that she was comfortable with him as well, and she fell in love, and she worked really hard on all of the training and the time commitment, so I think that really paid off too.
And I think I'm also just so interested in terms of being as an actor, in terms of knowing cameras, because obviously there's that getting to know period that we just talked about, but like when cameras were rolling, was there a learning curve initially for Bing, or did you kind of take to it immediately?
I don't really think he had any issues with the camera. He seemed to always be pretty good about it. There was a few times, he had to learn to understand there's a boom ahead, or up ahead, up above his head or something. But he seemed to be pretty comfortable with everything, and everyone on set was very aware and gracious about, we weren't right there when cameras were moving in and out or anything like that, and just keeping things quiet, and being very aware of, not trying to startle him or anything. And he's pretty unflappable, but he is still a dog, and we do still need to respect that, so.
The hardest thing for him was like when he had to act like he was misbehaving. Like when Constance Wu's character was like, get off the sofa. He wanted to get off the sofa. That was hard for him to understand that the right thing to do was to disobey. Or like he's pulling him out of the cab, like he wanted to come out of the cab. So, we had to work out ways to keep him, make him resist good behavior because he's such a good boy.
He's super alert. And like you say, he's one of our best scene partners ever. He really pays attention. And that's a remarkable thing, for any actor.
What you would say right before Bev and Dane came up here about that you obviously worked with dogs and worked with David's dog. I'm also just interested in terms of directing a scene with being in it. If you wanted something different, do you, obviously you can't talk to Dane, but in terms of actually want him to seem more sad or more, how do you, I guess, communicate that? Is that through Bev that you do that?
I mean, what we were trying to do was, I think, to help create the sense of a performance is his eye line was a really, really big thing, and point of view was something that we talked about a lot with our centaur for Giles Nudgens, and also obviously with Bev and with Bill Berloni. Like the two of them looking at each other, how do we represent their points of view? Them again looking at each other and observing each other, and because they don't want to be together, they eventually do. They eventually develop this bond. But with Bing, it really was about like, what is he looking at? How is he looking at? How sustained is that look? And as I was saying earlier, Bev was so critical to that because Bing is so in love with Bev. That like where Bev was, if Bev moved, if Bing was going to move, all of that was very coming to understand how we could coordinate that over the course of the shoot was really instrumental.
Bev, I understand, because obviously Bing's kind of on a press tour of his own, both first in New York and now here in Los Angeles. We're so happy that both of you could be here tonight. Is Bing getting recognized?
Yes, it's weird. We've been walking around in New York City, and people have recognized us quite frequently. The Fallon clip of him howling has really gotten some views, and so I've had people ask if that's Bing from Fallon. But even before that, like when we were in New York for the film festival last fall, I had a guy stop me on the street and he had a FaceTime with his wife and said it was like being Robert De Niro. Yeah, it's kind of wild.
Something I wanted to ask Scott and David, that there's I have this correct, there's an epigram at the beginning of the book that Wilson Baker has. It says, the question any novel is really trying to answer is life worth living? And there's so many themes and so many things that are going on in the film. But I wondered in terms of the process of reading that review initially, and working on the screenplay, developing it, and finding a cast for it. Was that one of the questions that you were curious about in terms of?
I mean, this is going to sound overly ingenuous, but when we read The Friend, it deals with basic essential issues of being alive and the way that human beings relate to each other, the way human beings relate to other creatures, and that when you can find yourself sitting in that and really asking yourself those kinds of questions as you're actually make the movie, you're constantly dealing with things that matter to you and that you relate to, and that you hope that as you're making this thing, other people will begin to relate to as you're making it, but also when it's finished. So that's a gift, and that gift comes from Siegel's book. And we have felt really lucky, as we made this movie, and we've said it's been a labor of love for more than 6 years, and it's really true.
Well, congratulations on completing it and giving that gift to the rest of us. Really fast, just as a reminder, there's going to be a second film that's going to be shown, The Deep End in 35mm, which is also one of my favorite films the two of you have made. Scott and David will be here after a brief intermission to do an intro for that, so I highly recommend sticking around for The Deep End as well, which is really, really terrific as well. In the meantime, I want to thank Scott and David and Dane for being here.